And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Tonight's weather showing front moving in, bringing quite a widespread area of rain with it from the Bering Strait up into across much of the northwest interior. Lighter amounts on the north side of the Brooks Range there out to the Arctic coast, but staying dry to the south and southeast with these showers finally tapering off. Maybe a few clearing periods showing up. Mostly clear here, southern Alaska, Prince William Sound into the Kuskokwim Valley down to Bristol Bay, and then pick the clouds up over the Kuskokwim-Yukon Delta. This system here tracking eastward brings a chance of rain to Nikolsky, extending back to Adak, and showers continue to diminish along the southeast coast. That'll lead to a partly sunny day with light winds for the Panhandle tomorrow. Mostly cloudy with a risk of an afternoon shower over the mountainous terrain here, Copper River Basin, Chugach areas. Could get some light rain as far south as the northern Susitna Valley, and definitely rain and gusty winds here in the central interior areas with possible wind gusts of 35 miles an hour ahead of this front, and a good shot of rain coming in with it there as it kind of drags eastward there, gets hung up here in Norton Sound, the Seward Peninsula, so rain all day there, partly to mostly sunny. Bristol Bay into the Kuskokwim Delta there, another sunny day in store for Kodiak Island as well. Light winds for the central and eastern Aleutians, and a weak warm front up in through here. Actually, the system with that moves eastward pretty rapidly here, bringing gusty winds and rain, almost reaching the southwest coast by late Friday, probably Friday evening. Definitely the Pribilofs will see a wet, windy day coming in with this system ahead of that occluded front there, and an area of rain extending from the eastern Aleutians here all the way back out off the chart. Otherwise, periods of rain continue here, a little bit narrower now with showers to the north and to the south of that frontal boundary there, with the main rain area right along the front more or less. So a couple of wet days coming up for the central interior, especially on Friday for the east side here, and partly sunny for the southeast coast. And for the coastal water forecast, south to west winds there at 10 knots, central coast, south to southeast winds at 10 knots, and light southeast winds for the north coast. Inside waters, basically variable winds at about 10 knots or less, with seas pretty slight. And for the day on Friday, northwest winds at 10 knots with slight seas for the central and northern inside waters. Clarence Strait, northwest 15, seas 3 feet. 20-knot northwest winds in the forecast for the south coast with 4 to 5 foot seas, northwest of 15 on the central coast, and light west southwest winds on the north coast. Prince William Sound, southeast wind 10 knots, seas 2 feet. Variable winds at 10 knots for the eastern North Gulf Coast. Become east at 15 here over toward the west. Same thing for the Barren Islands. Otherwise, Kamishak Bay, south winds at 20 knots. Small craft advisories for Cook Inlet. South winds 25 knots with seas 5 to 7 feet. And small craft advisories continue for the inlet here on Friday, south to southwest 25 knots, seas about 5 feet, south at 20 for Kamishak Bay, and southeast at 15 for the Barren Islands. Otherwise, Prince William Sound and the North Gulf Coast, light variable wind conditions. And for Kodiak Island, variable winds 10 to 15 knots. And east to southeast winds at 10 knots there for the Alaska Peninsula, west 15 for Bristol Bay. And for Friday, you got variable winds for Bristol Bay, otherwise south winds 15 knots here for the Alaska Peninsula. Light variable winds also for Kodiak Island at 10 knots. And for the eastern Aleutians tomorrow, small craft advisory, southeast winds up to 25 knots. Northwest winds at 20 knots here for Adak and Atka, and then westerlies to southwest winds at 25 knots, sometimes maybe even as high as 30 knots there around Amchitka Island. And for Friday, for the western Aleutians, southwest winds 25 knots, southwest at 20 knots for Adak and Atka, and for the eastern Aleutians, south winds 25 knots, seas 4 to 7 feet. In the southwest coast here, southwest winds 15 to 20 knots, and small craft advisories for both Norton Sound and St. Lawrence Island. Southwest winds tomorrow 25 knots with 5 foot seas. south of 20 knots for St. Matthew Island, southeast 20 knots for the Pribilofs with seas running 5 or 6 feet. And small craft advisories for the Pribilof Islands on Friday for south winds at 25 knots with seas close to 10 feet. South of 25 here for the Kuskokwim Delta coast with only 3-foot seas there. Southeast 20 for St. Matthew Island, Yukon Delta coast, and St. Lawrence Island, south winds at 20 knots. South 15 for Norton Sound. And up to the Arctic coast on the east side, either west or north winds. Pretty light though at 10 knots there, but brisk wind advisories, small craft advisories there for the central Arctic coast, west at 25 knots. West-northwest winds here for the western coast at about 15 knots. And for the Chukchi Sea, north winds at 15 with seas around 4 feet. Outlook for Friday for the Chukchi Sea, north to northeast winds 10 to 15 knots, seas 3 feet, and southwest 20-knot winds for the central and western Arctic coastal areas with 4-foot seas. Eastern Beaufort Sea coast, west wind at 10 knots, seas 2 feet.